Hello. My name is Elle. 3 months ago, my sister laughed in my face at a bank lobby full of strangers and told me, "We don't serve low-class people." She didn't know I held the codes to every family asset. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I just signed a slip and withdrew $2 billion. The entire room fell silent. She dropped to her knees. But that wasn't the most painful part. What hurts more is knowing that your own blood can plot your erasure with a smile. And what do you do when your family sees your worth only after they've stolen everything from you? Let me show you. It had been months since I last stepped inside Whitfield Bank, the building that once smelled like polished marble and quiet pride. Today, it smelled different, colder, sharper, like the scent of something waiting to break. My hands trembled slightly as I pushed open the glass door, but I straightened my shoulders before anyone could notice. I didn't come here to beg. I came to handle my own business. The lobby was as I remembered it: high ceilings, gleaming counters, people who carried themselves as though money made them immune to gravity. Their voices dropped when I walked in. I felt eyes on my back, whispers fluttering just behind me like moths around light. I ignored them. My heels clicked against the floor in a rhythm that tried to sound confident. I was dressed simply, neatly. Still, I could sense the judgment, like perfume, too heavy to ignore. I approached the counter, where a young clerk looked up with the polite indifference of someone trained to smile without feeling. "Good morning," I said, sliding my ID toward him. "I'd like to make a withdrawal." Before he could respond, laughter broke across the room, familiar, sharp, too bright to be kind. My stomach dropped before I even turned around. "Oh?" That voice. My sister, Isolde. She was standing near the entrance with 2 clients, her perfect hair, her perfect posture, her perfect sneer. She looked at me as if I were a ghost who'd wandered in from the wrong side of town. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We don't serve low-class people here." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. But then the silence hit, the kind that tightens around your throat and makes you aware of every heartbeat. A few people chuckled under their breath. One of her clients shifted awkwardly, pretending not to look, but I could see their phones, recording, always recording. My lips parted, but no words came. I felt heat rising to my face, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Isolde smiled wider, the kind of smile that feeds off cruelty. "Maybe try the credit union down the street, Elle," she added, her tone sweet as syrup. "They might be more your level." Her words echoed in my chest. My instinct was to walk out, but something inside me refused to move. I turned back to the teller. "I'd like to withdraw from my personal account," I said, my voice calm, steady. He looked from me to Isolde, unsure which one of us to listen to. "Ma'am, can I?" "Yes," I cut in, sliding a folded document toward him. "This account." His fingers trembled slightly as he typed in the numbers. The silence grew thick. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling vents and the rustle of papers in the back office. The monitor flickered. Then his eyes widened. "Ma'am," he stammered, voice barely above a whisper, "are you sure you want to withdraw all of it?" I nodded once. "Yes. All of it." The sound of keys tapping filled the air. Then a single electronic ping echoed through the hall, sharp, final. A confirmation tone. The screen displayed the amount, $2 billion. $2 billion. I didn't need to look at Isolde to feel the shift in the room. Every breath, every whisper, froze midair. The clients beside her gasped. Phones lowered. Even the security guard at the door straightened up. "What?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. I turned slowly, meeting her eyes. For once, she had nothing to say. The arrogance drained from her face like color washing out of a photograph. She started, but her throat closed around the word. The clerk cleared his throat softly. Your withdrawal is complete, Ms. Whitfield, he said, handing me the printed confirmation. His tone had changed, measured, respectful. I took it, folding the paper carefully, and tucked it into my purse. Isolde's knees buckled. She caught herself on the counter but then sank to the floor anyway, staring up at me like she didn't recognize who I was. Someone moved toward her, trying to help, but she waved them off, trembling. She said again, voice breaking, why would you? I looked down at her. Not with anger, not with pity. Just distance. For a moment, I wasn't standing in that bank anymore. I was 8 years old again, sitting on the steps of our old house, dirt on my knees, while she stood over me in a white dress, smirking. You'll never be more than a shadow of me, she'd said that day, and walked away laughing. Maybe she believed it all these years. Maybe she needed to. The clerk's voice pulled me back to the present. Ms. Whitfield, do you need security to escort you out? I shook my head. No, thank you. My voice sounded foreign in my ears, too calm for what just happened. I turned toward the door. Cameras flashed. I could hear people murmuring my name now, a mix of awe and discomfort. I didn't look back. My heels hit the marble again, steady, deliberate. Outside, the cold air hit me like a wave. The sky was still gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I pressed a hand against my chest, not out of pride, but because I needed to remember that I was still breathing. I had just shattered my sister's illusion of control, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something had been taken from me too, something invisible but heavy. As I walked toward my car, I caught my reflection in the glass window of the bank, my face pale, my eyes unreadable. People would think this was revenge. They'd call it poetic justice. But all I could feel was the quiet ache of someone who'd finally stopped running and didn't know what came next. I started the engine and sat there for a long moment, watching the rain begin to fall. My phone buzzed, messages already pouring in, news spreading fast. I turned it off. For the first time in years, the silence felt mine. Not forced on me, not suffocating, just mine. I didn't know it then, but that humiliation inside the bank wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything that would follow, the unraveling, the reckoning, the truth that had waited too long to surface. That humiliation at the bank wasn't the end, it was the beginning. I realized that 2 days later, sitting in my apartment with the blinds half drawn and the television glowing faintly in the dark. The rain hadn't stopped since that morning, and it drummed against the window like a pulse I couldn't ignore. The world was talking about me now, about us. My name was trending online, my face plastered across headlines that treated my pain like entertainment. Whitfield heiress shocks the public, one anchor announced with mock excitement. Withdraws $2 billion after being insulted by her sister. The footage rolled again, Isolde's smug face, my stillness, her collapse. Over and over. People called me brave. Some called me ruthless. But none of them knew what it felt like sitting there afterward, when the silence came and you had no one to share it with. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't vindicated. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the middle of me and left the shell standing upright. The phone wouldn't stop buzzing, calls, messages, interviews I would never give. I silenced it, stared at the TV until my eyes ached, then turned it off. The room went quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of traffic far below. I thought of my sister's face as she fell to her knees, of the way her voice cracked when she tried to say my name. For a fleeting second, I had almost pitied her. But pity was something she never afforded me. I got up, poured a glass of water, and sat by the window. The city lights blurred behind the rain. Somewhere out there, Isolde was already spinning the story in her favor. I could almost hear her saying, "Elle's always been dramatic. She loves attention." That's when the knock came. 3 quick raps, firm, businesslike. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find a man in a dark coat holding an envelope. "Ms. Whitfield?" he asked. "Yes." He handed it to me, nodded politely, and left before I could ask a thing. The envelope was thick, official, white paper with the family crest embossed in gold. I knew that seal. My stomach twisted before I even tore it open. Inside, summons to court. For a moment, the words didn't register. Then they burned. My father, Marcellus Whitfield, was suing me for financial manipulation and misappropriation of family assets. The paper slipped from my hand. It landed softly on the carpet, but the sound felt like a thunderclap in my chest. I sank onto the couch, staring at nothing. My own father. I thought of him sitting in his study years ago, telling me that integrity mattered more than legacy. That money without conscience was a curse. How easily those words turned to ash when legacy became a weapon. The phone rang again. This time, I let it buzz until it stopped. I couldn't move. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the realization that every bond one thought unbreakable had already snapped without me noticing. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour. Then another knock. Softer this time. "Elle, it's me. Lumen Carter. My oldest friend, my lawyer, my anchor through every storm I tried to survive." I opened the door, and she stepped in without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes scanned the room, then landed on the paper still lying on the floor. "They didn't waste time," she murmured. "I saw it coming." I swallowed hard. "You knew." "Not this fast," she said, picking up the document and skimming through it. "They're trying to erase you, Elle. If they can paint you as unstable, they'll strip your shares, your rights, your voice. You're a threat to their version of the family." Her words were sharp, but she spoke them gently, like a doctor delivering bad news with steady hands. "I'm not a threat," I said quietly. "You weren't," she replied. "But after that bank incident, you are now." I wanted to argue, but she was right. The moment I refused to play the silent sister, I'd crossed an invisible line. "Do you want me to file a counter?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, my voice low. "Let them think I'm cornered." She nodded, understanding more than I said. Lumen always did. After she left, the apartment felt colder. I sat on the couch again, the summons on the table in front of me. My reflection wavered in the glass surface, tired eyes, drawn mouth. I hardly recognized myself. The next day, I didn't leave the apartment. I couldn't. Every channel played the same footage, every talk show speculated about the Whitfield family feud. My name was dissected by strangers with coffee cups in their hands. And then, as if to make sure I couldn't breathe, the press conference aired. The screen showed Isolde standing at a podium, dressed in pale gray with our father beside her, his expression grave, her smile perfectly measured. The Whitfield crest gleamed on the banner behind them. "My sister has sadly taken advantage of our father's generosity for years," Isolde said, her tone dripping with practiced sorrow. "We've tried to help her, but she's made choices that forced our family to take legal action." I gripped the remote so tightly it creaked. "She's withdrawn funds far exceeding her rightful inheritance," she continued. "We love Elle, but love doesn't mean enabling selfish behavior." My jaw clenched. My father stood silent beside her, nodding slowly as if each word she spoke was gospel. The cameras flashed, the crowd murmured. Isolde's eyes glimmered, not with grief, but triumph. She was rewriting history in real time, and the world was swallowing it whole. Elle suffers from emotional instability, she added softly. It's been difficult to watch her spiral. We hope this legal process brings clarity and, most of all, healing. Healing. The word twisted inside me like a knife. I turned off the TV. My reflection stared back from the dark screen, expressionless, but trembling inside. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of wine, and set it down untouched. Then I went to the drawer under my desk. It was locked, I hadn't opened it in years. My hand hesitated before turning the key. Inside lay the original corporate charter, the document that founded Whitfield Enterprises. My mother's handwriting was still in the margins, neat and careful. They thought I was weak because I didn't fight back. They mistook restraint for surrender. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, then folded the papers neatly. If it's war they want, I whispered, they'll see what I've been holding back. I placed the file on the table, beside the summons, the two pieces of paper that now defined everything my family had become. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights blinked through the thin curtains, turning the room into a soft mosaic of shadow and gold. I took a deep breath, steady for the first time since the bank. I wasn't born a threat. But that week, I became one, the day they forced me to be. The moment I stepped through the gates of the estate, our estate, in the early light of that gray afternoon, I felt a hollow familiarity. The wrought iron arch still bore the Whitfield crest, the same etched metal I had gazed at as a child, dreaming of something bigger than what I'd been allowed. Its familiar curves now looked like bars. I parked the car where our old service vehicle used to sit. I remember that place when it smelled like grass after rain and opportunity felt endless. Today it only smelled like something long denied. When I opened the front door, the house welcomed me with silence, cold and measured. The polished floors gleamed, untouched by my footsteps for months, the walls seemed thicker. I wondered if they knew I was coming. Maybe they did. Maybe it was exactly what they expected, the unnoticed daughter returning to rummage through memories. I moved through the corridors as though I were crawling back into old wounds. I felt the weight, but I wouldn't limp. Not anymore. The drawing room held my mother where I left her, the chairs arranged in the same circle, the fireplace dark, the curtains drawn. Cressida turned toward me without rising. Her eyes locked onto mine, unfamiliar, distant. "Why are you here?" she asked, one sharp sentence. No greeting, no warmth. Just that question, as though I were a stranger. "I came to ask you something," I said. "Did you know, did father serve me papers?" I held up the summons like a challenge. "You know he sued me." She didn't blink. "You brought it on yourself," she answered. The words landed like stones in my chest. I realized then how early I had learned to swallow and nod. I didn't snap. I didn't argue. I left in silence, the thudding echo of the front door behind me louder than any exchange. I retreated into the study, once my refuge, now a vault of absence. Photographs were gone, the ones of me with ribbons in my hair, timid smiles, a little girl standing next to Isolde and Dad. Instead, a large portrait sat above the mantel, the three of them, Marcellus, Cressida, and Isolde, proud, gold frames gleaming. I traced the edges with my gaze. Their smiles seemed real, mine had been erased. In the closet, under piles of dust, I found my law school diploma shoved behind cardboard boxes. I pulled it out, turned it over. The signature looked fresh, sharp. I remembered the night I received it, Dad in his study saying, "You'll do great things." That felt like ages ago. Now it belonged to the shadows of a closet. The safe in my father's office still remembered me. I knew the code by heart. I'd come in junior year, nestled between shelves full of reports. Today the numbers rolled like a whispered password of truth. The lid opened. Inside lay the new will, crisp and final. I read with a slow, controlled breath, "To my daughters, I leave everything except L." Tears came, but quietly. Not shock, just the ache of recognition. I saw it, the years of being overlooked, of hearing, "You'll wait your turn," of being the background when they wanted a star. Everything codified in a single sentence. That night, I sat in the garden under a solitary lantern, the house behind me dark and looming. I had no tears left. The rain from earlier had passed, leaving the earth rich and damp. I sat on the stone bench, letting the cool air press against my skin. I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind, "They want me invisible. That's why I have to become unforgettable." And then I stood. The silence was no longer my prison, it was my cloak. I walked back toward the house, not with anger, but with a nimble resolve. I would show them the shape of someone they tried to erase. If erasing me was their plan, then silence would be my weapon. That thought lingered like smoke as I stood before the mirrored lobby doors of Whitfield Enterprises. The reflection staring back wasn't the timid daughter who'd once begged for a seat at the table, it was someone steadier, sharper, stripped of illusions. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked inside, and the sound echoed through the vast lobby like an announcement I hadn't been invited to make. It had been a week since the press conference, a week of lawyers whispering through phone lines and headlines that dissected every word I'd said, or hadn't said. I knew what today was, the quarterly shareholder meeting. I wasn't on the guest list. I also didn't care. The boardroom was on the top floor, overlooking Chicago's skyline. I still remembered how the sunlight used to pour through the tall windows when I worked here, back when I believed family meant protection, not power games. Now the glass reflected only the hard light of winter. When I opened the door, the hum of conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Executives who had once greeted me with smiles now stared as though I'd wandered in from a crime scene. At the head of the table sat Isolde, flawless, composed, and startled for half a second before her mask snapped back into place. "This is a private meeting," she said, her tone clipped, polished. I smiled faintly and pulled out a chair. "Then consider me the surprise agenda item." The CFO shifted in his seat. Someone coughed. I could feel the tension tighten like a drawn bowstring. I laid a folder on the table and slid out the original shareholder certificates, each signed, notarized, bearing my name and stake, 18% of the company, untouched since its founding. "These," I said, keeping my voice even, "are still valid. I'm here to exercise my right to review the books." The CFO looked to Isolde. She tilted her head, feigning sympathy. "L, your stake was diluted last year. We filed the paperwork. You should have received notice." I froze for a fraction of a second, though I didn't let it show. Diluted. The word burned. "I didn't receive anything," I replied. "Well," she said with a casual shrug, "perhaps you changed your address. Or maybe it got lost in your personal chaos." Her tone carried the faintest sneer, a reminder that she'd always preferred humiliation over honesty. The room stayed silent. Executives avoided my eyes, some glancing toward the window, others pretending to read their notes. It was corporate theater, polished, soulless, rehearsed. I took a breath, slow and deliberate. "Show me the filing date." Isolde turned to the screen behind her, clicking through slides. "We'll be reviewing quarterly reports first. Your inquiries can wait until the end, if there's time." Her control was absolute. Every movement, every pause choreographed for power. She projected the first slide, Whitfield Enterprises, Strategic Growth. My name appeared once, in small print beneath, Special Advisor. My stomach twisted. That was the title she'd given me, the invisible partner. As she spoke, her words blurred into background noise. As you can see, our success over the past fiscal year reflects leadership stability and unified vision. Unified. The word mocked me. I raised my hand. Why am I listed as an advisor? Because that's what you are, she replied smoothly. An honorary position. You stepped back years ago, remember? I never stepped back, I said. Then perhaps you simply faded away. The room tittered. My pulse thudded in my ears. I stood, leaning slightly across the table. You know that's not true. Every major merger, every acquisition strategy in the last decade had my name on it. The projections, the modeling, you used my work. Isolde didn't blink. And we're grateful for your contributions. But you can't claim ownership over collaboration. Her voice was honey and steel. She turned to the executives. Gentlemen, let's continue. No one objected. Not one. I sank back into my chair, hands clenched under the table. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was disbelief, sharp and cold. They'd rewritten my career like a memo no one would remember signing. When the meeting reached the financial summary, I spoke again. I'd like to see the estate's asset disclosures. The CFO hesitated. Ms. Whitfield, those are restricted. Not to shareholders, I countered. Even diluted ones. He looked at Isolde. She gave a small nod. The projector screen changed to a spreadsheet, columns of numbers scrolling past like falling dominoes. I scanned them quickly, trained eyes catching inconsistencies in seconds. Transfers. Trusts. Shadow entities I'd never heard of. Stop there, I said. The Whitfield Estate Trust, why is it under Isolde Holdings? The CFO swallowed. That's a restructuring for tax purposes. Tax purposes, I repeated. So that's what we call betrayal now. Isolde cut in, tone dripping with false concern. I think you're overreacting. Dad approved these changes. You know how complicated estate law can be. You've been out of the loop for a while. Out of the loop. Out of the family. Out of existence. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something shift inside me, like the first crack in a wall I hadn't realized I'd built. Every lawsuit, every diluted share, every rewritten record, it was all part of the same design. My erasure had been methodical. Legal. Quiet. When the meeting adjourned, no one met my eyes. They filed out silently, clutching folders, avoiding contact as though my presence might contaminate their careers. Only Isolde remained, pretending to organize her notes. Still chasing ghosts? She asked without looking up. Only the ones that haunt you, I said softly. She laughed. You're wasting your time. The company's moving forward, with or without your blessing. I gathered my folder. Be careful what you try to bury, Isolde. Some things don't stay dead. Her smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. That was enough. I left the boardroom slowly, letting the door close behind me with a whisper. The elevator ride down felt endless, the fluorescent light flickering overhead. I caught my reflection again in the mirrored walls, tired, yes, but no longer invisible. By the time I reached the street, the winter wind had picked up, slicing through my coat. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the building that once bore my name with pride. Whitfield Enterprises. A fortress built on my ideas, my loyalty, my silence. That was the last time I asked for a seat at their table. The next time, I came to flip it. That was the last time I asked for a seat at their table. The next time, I came to flip it. 3 days had passed since the board meeting. I barely slept. The city outside my condo was alive with its usual chaos, but inside, everything was still, except for the stacks of papers that now surrounded me. The air was heavy with the smell of black coffee and ink. I had turned my dining table into a war desk, files, ledgers, USB drives, and the old family trust documentation that I'd quietly retrieved from my mother's cabinet before she even realized what was missing. Silence became my rhythm. I spent hours cross-referencing figures, tracing each line of financial transactions from Whitfield Enterprises back through shell accounts and offshore trusts. The numbers told stories that people didn't want told, and as I dug deeper, those stories began to converge. The transactions looked ordinary at first. Legal, neat. But then there were the inconsistencies, the subtle shifts that only someone who knew the system could spot. Wire transfers with dates that didn't match the tax filings, small amounts redirected through unrelated accounts. Someone had built a maze to hide something. They thought I'd never look here, I whispered to myself, tapping my pen against the table. I turned to the corporate tax records from the year my father first claimed I had stepped back from the company. The filings were digitally signed, his signature, her oversight. And then there it was. A line item marked consultancy service transfer, $1.2 million, listed under a subsidiary called Northvale Strategies. A shell company. Registered under an address in Miami. And when I dug one level deeper, ownership traced straight back to Isolde's private ventures. My stomach tightened. This wasn't incompetence. This was orchestration. By the time dawn filtered through the blinds, my condo was a sea of open folders. I hadn't eaten. My pulse thrummed with both exhaustion and adrenaline. I took a deep breath and reached for my phone. "Lumen, it's time," I said when she answered. There was a pause, then her steady voice, "Time for what?" "For the first strike." 2 hours later, I was sitting across from her at her office downtown. She looked sharp in her gray suit, eyes alert but calm. She'd always been the balance to my fire. The conference room smelled faintly of paper and citrus cleaner, the kind of sterile air that makes bad news easier to deliver. I spread the documents out in front of her. "Here. The transfers. The tax trails. The will. It's all connected. They diluted my shares, moved assets through shell companies, and then used the lawsuit to make it official." Lumen leaned in, scanning each page. She didn't interrupt. Finally, she looked up. "They wanted to bury you legally," she said softly. "Not ruin you emotionally, erase you on paper." "Exactly." She sat back in her chair, considering. "We can't play defense anymore. It's time to go on the record." I nodded. "No more warnings. They play with fire, we hand them the burn notice." She almost smiled at that. "Then let's start with an emergency motion to freeze all assets linked to the Whitfield Family Trust. If the judge approves it, nothing moves, not a dollar, without your consent." We spent hours crafting the motion, every paragraph lined with precision. The legal world doesn't reward emotion, it rewards detail. And detail was my language. By the time we filed it, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, a control. When I finally stepped outside, the late afternoon light hit my face, and I realized how long I'd been holding my breath. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. The next morning, we received notice, a preliminary hearing had been set. My father and Isolde would be summoned. I arrived at the courthouse just before noon. The air outside buzzed with reporters. I could feel their eyes, their curiosity, the faint electric hum of gossip. I didn't stop to pose or comment. Dressed in black, I walked past them with my head high. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of oak and nerves. Marcellus and Isolde were already there, him at the defense table, her seated elegantly beside him in a cream suit. She turned as I entered, her expression a perfect blend of irritation and disbelief. "Elle," she said quietly, "you're not supposed to be here." I gave a small, restrained smile. "Neither are you. This isn't your kingdom anymore." Her jaw tightened. My father avoided my gaze, his hands folded on the table. I wondered if he even recognized me anymore, or if the version of me he remembered had already been replaced by Isolde's narrative. The judge entered, calling the court to order. I stood when prompted and handed over the packet, dozens of pages neatly bound, labeled, and marked with every discrepancy I had uncovered. The room fell into that thick, charged silence I had come to know too well. The judge flipped through the documents. "These are substantial," he said carefully. "Do you understand the implications of these filings, Ms. Whitfield?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I understand exactly what they mean." Isolde's voice cracked the air. "This is a stunt. She's trying to destroy our family's reputation." I turned toward her. "I'm not destroying anything, Isolde. I'm just turning on the lights." The courtroom murmured. Cameras flashed again. My father shifted uncomfortably. The judge cleared his throat. "Order in the court." He glanced back at me, then at the stack of papers. "I'll review this motion immediately. Until then, no assets are to be transferred or liquidated. Temporary freeze granted." Isolde inhaled sharply, as if she'd been slapped. My father finally looked at me, his eyes tired, a mixture of shame and disbelief. I didn't flinch. As the session adjourned, I turned to face them both. My heels echoed on the hardwood floor as I walked toward the exit. The photographers surged forward, shouting questions, but I ignored them. At the door, I paused just long enough to look back. "The people who erased me," I said, voice steady, "forgot one thing. I remember everything." Then I walked out into the afternoon sunlight, the chill air biting at my cheeks. I felt strangely calm, steady in a way I hadn't in years. The courthouse steps were crowded, but the noise blurred into a dull hum behind me. For the first time, it wasn't humiliation or heartbreak that filled my chest. It was purpose. They came after me with arrogance. Now I'd return the favor, with precision. It was the call that changed my trajectory. 2 days after I walked into that courtroom and made my motion for asset freeze, I received a message from someone I thought had vanished, Vera Carter. She told me she had followed everything they were doing, every manipulated contract, every shell company. I paused before answering. My condo felt emptier than ever, the echo of the lawsuit and the boardroom betrayal still heavy in the air. Then I picked up the phone, because the game had shifted and I needed to shift with it. Vera invited me to meet at her place that night. I drove downtown, past the winter streets of Chicago, the wind pushing against the car as if demanding to know my next move. I arrived at her modest high-rise apartment exactly at 8. The glass doors clicked behind me and the building seemed almost quiet, like it knew what was coming. Inside, Vera looked older than I remembered, but sharper too, no longer the young partner who once wanted to start her own firm, but the strategist I needed. She beckoned me into the living room, whispered so even the walls seemed to lean closer. "I have something you'll want to see," she said. The USB drive came out of her pocket, not showily, but with purpose. We sat opposite each other at a small table. The city lights behind her window flickered like watchful eyes. I plugged the drive into my laptop. A list of company names. Trust fund titles. Audio files. I clicked one, the voice was unmistakable, Dad's, Marcellus Whitfield. Clear, brittle. "How do you want to listen?" Vera asked. "In real time or a transcript?" "In real time," I said. The recording played, "Erase her. I don't want her name tied to anything we build from now on." The words bent the air. I clenched my jaw. Do you hear that? Vera asked softly. Your father and your sister, they planned everything. The will, the asset shift, the lawsuit, it was all about removing you. My throat went dry. I wasn't crying. I was resisting tears. I regarded the files like forensic evidence, not emotion, fact. I knew something was off, I whispered. But this is the smoking gun, Vera finished. Now, we act. We worked late into the night, drafting motions, lining up subpoenas, securing affidavits. Every page, every clause had to hold in court. I had to show them I wasn't undone by their betrayal, I was refocused. Dawn came while I signed underlined signatures and attached exhibits. My fingers were raw, but it felt right. The next morning I walked into the courthouse again. This time not as a defendant, but as a challenger. Reporters clustered outside the entrance. I made no statement. I didn't need to. My purpose spoke for me. Inside, the room felt narrower, heavier. My father sat at the defense table, his posture rigid. Isolde sat beside him, her usual poise inadequate today. My turn came. I rose and handed the judge the flash drive Vera had given me. The audio, the transcripts, the investments, all uploaded. The room whispered. The judge accepted the evidence. Cameras clicked. My father's shoulders slumped. Isolde whispered to him, "We are going to lose control." He didn't respond. For the first time I felt something like quiet vindication. Not joy, but the clarity that comes when you reveal what someone thought hidden. The judge announced the temporary freeze of transfers. No assets moved until further order. My father stared at me, shocked. My sister looked as if she might collapse. I didn't stay. I walked out calmly, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the secret thrills of victory. I just kept walking. When I reached the courthouse steps, the wind surged. I raised my face to the sky. I didn't say anything. But in my mind, I didn't do this to hurt them. I did it so they'd never hurt me again. And now, power once neglected, once stolen, had stirred. It didn't retreat quietly. It advanced. That afternoon, the Whitfield corporate office felt like a battlefield masquerading as boardroom normalcy. I had entered under the guise of business as usual, yet the undercurrent was anything but. 5 days had passed since the world began watching me, and now the tables were set for the most dangerous move yet. I arrived at the sleek lobby of Whitfield Enterprises just after 5 o'clock. The winter light had already begun to fade, and the clean lines of the building cast longer shadows than they did the day before. I felt those shadows creeping in, along with the memory of how I used to believe this place was mine. That belief died early this week. Inside, executives moved in tight formations. Each handshake, each whispered greeting was choreographed. I saw the forlorn glance of the receptionist in the corner who used to wave when I passed through. Not today. Today, I was intruder and former heir both. In the emergency board meeting that had been convened this afternoon, my father, Marcellus Whitfield, stood at the head of the room under the golden crest. His voice grim. "I am stepping back, temporarily," he announced. He coughed. His face looked pale, weaker than I'd ever seen him. The board murmured like stirred water. But I watched him from the gallery window, and I knew this wasn't about health. It was strategy. From the high-angle perch I'd taken, I could see Isolde rise slowly. Her position at the table now held the power she had always coveted. She looked at me, slightly above me, though only because she was standing. Her expression said, "I win. You lose." Yet it rang hollow. Because while she had position, she did not have truth. And truth was what I carried. Later that evening, I found her at my condo. I should have known, this was theater. She held a satin envelope in one hand, tears in her eyes. "You've won," she said, voice heavy. "Please don't take the rest of it from us." I studied her carefully. The light in her eyes flickered between guilt and triumph. "We are family," she added, wrapping her free arm around me. "You don't have to fight anymore." "Really?" I asked. The family line always cut deeper than betrayal, because it was supposed to mean safety. "Not now." She detailed our childhood. "I've lived under your shadow," she said. "I've worked harder than you'll ever know." Her voice cracked. She held my gaze, waiting for comfort, waiting for a sisterly embrace. At that moment my phone buzzed silently. One word on the screen: "Don't trust her." From Vera. Right then I saw it clearly. The tears were part of the play, the shoulder offered part of the trap. I withdrew slowly. "I'll think about it," I said. The envelope stayed unopened on the coffee table. I left without hugging her, and the door closed behind me. The next morning still hung heavy. The tabloids had exploded overnight. "Whitfield heiress allegedly bribed board member," read one headline. Another, "L. Whitfield linked to fraudulent emails." My name trended again, only this time it was under false accusations. I watched from my condo, as the smear intensified. Stolen documents, forged signatures, leaked emails, they were all built to paint me as unstable, dishonest, unworthy. It was all too neat. Too fast. That's when I pulled up the audio file from the USB drive I had hidden away. I listened to it once more, Isolde's voice whispering in the boardroom after I left, "She won't see this coming." The phrase echoed like a threat, but now it felt like a clue. I realized her visit to me was the setup. While she held me in false comfort, her operatives moved behind the curtain, planting evidence, twisting facts, orchestrating the narrative. She played the victim while casting me as the villain. By midday I was moving again, my own forces now aligned, quietly. Emails were dispatched, attorneys briefed, reporters contacted. I didn't shout my truth. I didn't need to. I simply watched as the foundations of her attack trembled. She thought the last move belonged to her. She didn't realize the boardroom had cameras, and I had prepared the playback. That evening, I stood by my window, gazing out at the city lights. The wind pressed cold against the glass. I allowed myself a single internal smile. "You made your last move," I whispered into the night. "Now I'll make mine." The morning I walked into the courthouse, the air was sharp with winter's edge, the kind that slides beneath coats and presses against your ribs. I arrived just past 9, the December sun low in the sky, casting long, cold shadows across the marble steps. With each step I took, I felt lighter, not because this day was easy, but because it was final. I paused briefly outside the glass doors of the atrium. My reflection stared back at me, white wool coat crisp against black slacks, hair tucked neatly behind my ears, jaw steady. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't bracing for a blow. I was here on purpose, not in reaction. I wasn't walking into a war. I was walking into an ending. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with quiet energy. Lawyers passed with heavy briefcases and whispered names. Security guards stood straight, scanning for threat or scandal. But I felt none of it. The hallway stretched before me like a narrow river of polished tile, and I walked it with the certainty of someone who no longer needed to convince anyone of her truth. Near the courtroom, I could already see the crowd forming. The press area was beginning to swell, reporters clustering like vultures, their lenses clicking, microphones at the ready. I heard murmurs as I passed, "That's her, right? Is she going to speak? Didn't her sister deny the allegations?" I didn't stop. I didn't even glance sideways. Their curiosity couldn't touch me anymore. I had been dissected, doubted, dismissed, and yet I stood. When I entered the courtroom, the tension was already thick, suspended in the stillness like the final breath before a storm breaks. There he was, my father. Once the man who held my hand while crossing the street, now a stranger in a suit he hadn't chosen, eyes sunken, jaw slack. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he didn't respond. He just stared at the polished surface of the defense table, as if waiting for something to save him that never would. Beside him sat my sister, Valora. Her presence was as composed as ever, hair sleek, pearls resting at her collarbone, but the edges had frayed. Her mouth was tight, her gaze rigid. I recognized that expression. It was the same one I used to wear when I still believed in second chances, when I still thought silence would earn me a seat at the table. But I had learned. Silence doesn't protect you. It only quiets the evidence until someone else writes your story. The bailiff called the courtroom to order. The judge entered, stern, tired, unimpressed by drama. I stood when asked, stepped forward with my folder of evidence. It felt heavier than it should have, not because of its physical weight, but because of everything it represented: emails, statements, audio recordings. Receipts, as the world liked to call them. But they weren't just receipts. They were memories with timestamps. I passed the folder to the court clerk, my fingers steady. No tremble, no second guessing. Let them hear it all. As the judge opened the file, he lifted the first page, brows furrowing slightly. Then came the recording. A soft click, and the courtroom speakers released the voice that had haunted me for months. My sister's voice. She won't see this coming. Clear. Calculated. No way to spin it. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that lands in your chest and expands, forcing everyone to breathe a little shallower. I watched the moment register across the room, the twitch of the lawyer's pen, the slow turn of a juror's head, the judge's long blink. Truth is loud, even when it whispers. The judge leaned toward the mic. Ms. Whitfield, he said, his voice measured, do you understand the gravity of submitting these documents to the court? I looked directly at him. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. Because the gravity goes both ways. No drama. No raised voice. Just truth, grounded and deliberate. For the first time in a long while, I felt the ground beneath me return. Not just the courtroom floor, but the foundation of who I was, who I had always been beneath the gaslighting, the dismissals, the cold politeness that passed for love. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. By noon, the hearing had adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the storm I had expected finally broke, not in the sky, but in camera flashes and shouted questions. The media swarmed, hungry for the next soundbite. I stepped up to the microphones, breath steady. This time, I had something to say. No one, I said calmly, should have to purchase their worth in a family. No one should have to pay for silence, for peace, or for love. I pulled a cashier's check from my bag and handed it to the court liaison. My sister's remaining balance from our joint inheritance, I said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. This is the last check she'll ever cash in my name. I didn't need to look for Valora's reaction. I already knew it. She would feel the weight of that check far longer than I ever had to. That evening, I returned to the estate. The house was still, too still. The kind of quiet that used to make me feel like I was trespassing in my own childhood. I walked in through the front door, not with a key I borrowed, but one that was legally mine again. The hallways were long, their shadows familiar. The chandeliers hummed with soft electricity. I passed by portraits, furniture, velvet curtains, all the trappings of wealth that had never managed to make this house feel like home. In the drawing room, Cressida, my father's third wife, sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, gaze low. She didn't greet me. Just nodded, solemn and silent. I crossed to the fireplace and opened my coat. From my bag, I pulled a small photo, one from childhood. Me and Valora in the garden, sun on our faces, arms around each other. I placed it on the mantel where it used to sit before someone quietly removed it, as though erasure could heal a wound. It didn't speak to love. It spoke to memory. And memory was mine now. I left without another word. Some chapters don't deserve a goodbye. Outside, the cold had deepened. The sky hung heavy with stars, sharp and distant. I looked up at the house, at its towering windows and manicured hedges. This estate had once symbolized power, legacy, permanence. But it no longer held my story. It held only the dust of what had been taken and what I had reclaimed. I turned away from the house. Driving off, I didn't look back. There were no tears. No triumphant music swelling in my chest. Just the road ahead and a silence that no longer stung. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quiet knowing that you are finally free. Sometimes, it's the silence that restores you. The traffic lights in Newport Beach changed to green just as I pulled into the parking spot near the small legal aid building where I now consult part-time. I paused, letting the engine turn off on its own, and I listened to the ocean wind through the open window. It carried salt and possibility in equal measure. I was 3 months away from the court's verdict, 3 months away from the flash of cameras, and yet something inside me had finally reached quiet. I took a deep breath, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out. My home nearby echoed the same calm I wanted to carry inside. The town's rhythm was slower here than Chicago's, the white caps of the Pacific reminding me how long waves can be, how they always return. My condo was modest, no Whitfield crest on the door, no oversized marble foyer. Just a porch, a single chair, and that infinite horizon. Every morning I lit a candle before I sat down with my own thoughts. It was for the version of me that hadn't survived what came before, the daughter who stayed quiet. I closed my eyes and let the flame flicker. It was small and steady, just like what I was trying to rebuild, a life defined not by what they tried to erase, but by what I chose to remember. That weekday morning I finished meeting with a young woman whose case involved financial exploitation by her stepfather. After we talked, I walked her to the door and said, "You've got a voice, let it be heard." She nodded, tears brave in her eyes. As she left, I realized, this was exactly why I did it. Not for vindication. Not for revenge. But for someone who felt overlooked. Later, while I sat at the window with my journal open, I found the white envelope from my mother on the kitchen counter. I hesitated. No tear, no shout. Just the rising sense of someone I once hoped would defend me but instead kept silent. Inside the envelope was a letter. "I watched your interview. You are everything I should have seen in you." That was all. No apology. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in the drawer labeled "Past." Plates scraped in a nearby apartment, a dog barked somewhere up the block, the sea surf pushed to shore. I sipped coffee, looked out over the small garden outside the window and thought of the daughter I left behind. I thought of my sister's cruel words, "We don't serve low-class people." I thought of the boardroom, of the courtroom, of the deal that went sideways and the moment I walked out in white. I thought about how far that one walk brought me. A few days later, Lumen Carter knocked at my door. She carried with her the kind of news that didn't make for casual conversation. I invited her in and poured tea. The nerves of the day settled around us like warm dusk. She held a letter. "You've been nominated for the National Advocacy Award for Women in Business." She said it quietly, watching for my reaction. I looked at her. I didn't do it to be seen, I told her gently, I did it so I wouldn't be invisible. She nodded. I know, she said, and you deserve this. I felt an unfamiliar thing, acceptance, but I also felt the old instinct, to retreat. I declined the nomination. My work is not about trophies, I said. It's about the ones still unseen. I meant what I said. The next afternoon, I drove back to Chicago. I passed the old bank, the one whose marble floors still carried my heels from the day I withdrew $2 billion. I parked across the street and watched a woman at the teller's window. She sat small, head down, clutching papers. The teller glanced away. My heart clenched. I stepped out, walked across the street and stood beside her. Excuse me, I said softly. She looked up, surprise, then relief. She's next, I told her, pointing to me. You don't have to sweep yourself off the floor alone. The woman's eyes hinged open. No words needed. She smiled, faint as dawn but real. I drove away, thinking how things come full circle. Back by my condo that night, I sat on the small balcony, watching the tide rise. The sea whispered secrets, years of salt, years of struggle, years of stillness. I closed my journal and looked at the city lights across the water. My voice in my head said, I didn't get justice from them. But I got it for me. The sea continued its rhythm. The candle flickered at my side. I let the calm settle in. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering with clarity, stepping forward with purpose. I wasn't the daughter who sat quietly at the table anymore. I was the one who built her own. Sometimes, the people who share our last name are the ones who hurt us the most, and the silence we carry becomes heavier than the betrayal itself. But Elle's story reminds us, dignity doesn't come from being accepted, it comes from knowing your worth, even when others refuse to see it. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by your own family? Share your story in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. And if this story spoke to something in your heart, don't forget to subscribe. More